The homeless man who killed his parents to steal their inheritance. It was the kind of crime that made even seasoned detectives sit in silence. A quiet suburban home. 2 parents, lifeless in their own bedroom. No signs of forced entry. Nothing stolen except their lives. And the killer? Someone they had once held in their arms, fed, clothed, and prayed for. A man they had given everything to, until the day he decided he wanted it all, faster. The killer's name was Thomas Reed. On paper, he was homeless, no job, no address, but to his parents, he was still their boy, the one who just needed another chance. For months, they had let him sleep in their garage, fed him warm meals, and handed him money they couldn't really spare. What they didn't know was that Thomas had been watching them, not their kindness, not their faces, their bank statements. Thomas had learned about their will. He knew exactly how much they had, and exactly how quickly it could all be his. In his mind, they weren't his family anymore. They were a lockbox, and all he needed was the right moment to open it. That moment came on a rainy Tuesday night. The house was quiet. His father's breathing was heavy from sleep apnea. His mother's medication bottles sat on the nightstand. Thomas stepped inside their bedroom with a kitchen knife and a plan that had been growing in the shadows of his mind for months. By the time he left the room, both of them were gone, their blood still warm. The inheritance would never come the way he imagined, because the police moved faster than he thought. And when they caught him, barefoot and soaked, wandering the streets with $20 in his pocket, he wasn't the grieving son. He was the heir to a fortune he would never touch, because he had traded it for life in a cage. If you think evil wears a mask, you're wrong. Sometimes it wears the same face that smiled at you in childhood photos. Sometimes it sits across from you at the dinner table, nodding politely, while thinking about how you'll look when you're dead. Thomas Reed wasn't just a murderer, he was the embodiment of betrayal. A man who took the very people who loved him the most and reduced them to a transaction. This is not a story about drugs, gangs, or strangers breaking into a home. This is about greed. Cold, calculated, patient greed. The kind that doesn't care about family ties, shared blood, or years of sacrifice. For months, Thomas lived under his parents' roof, smiling in their kitchen, helping with groceries, while imagining exactly how their deaths would pay for his freedom. What makes this case so chilling isn't just the brutality of the crime, it's the intimacy. He didn't kill out of rage. There was no heated argument, no burst of uncontrollable violence. This was planned, rehearsed in his mind until it became inevitable. The blade was just the final step in a long chain of decisions that began the moment he saw their will. Over the next minutes, I'm going to walk you through every detail, the background, the crime scene, the investigation, and the trial that left even the jury unable to look at Thomas without shaking their heads. You'll hear about the lies, the cover-ups, and the moments where he almost got away with it. But before we go deeper into this darkness, make sure you subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment below the country and city you're watching from. Because tonight's story isn't just about one family destroyed, it's about the moment trust dies, and how quickly love can turn into a weapon. The bulb above the garage door had a tremor, a stutter of light, as if it were trying to warn someone in Morse code no one knew how to read. Neighbors remembered that quiver, not because it was unusual, but because it became a metronome to the testimony. "It flickered," Mrs. D'Angelo said. "I was taking out the recycling at 11:38. The light flickered." In suburban investigations, memories are built out of lawn care and little humilities. You count the seconds on mundane things because the horror has no clock. Thomas slept in that garage for months. A cot, a milk crate for a nightstand. A space heater scarred by something that had melted against its grate. His mother tucked a quilt around him that she had sewn herself, navy triangles stitched into a storm. She told friends he was turning a corner. She said he'd found a part-time gig at a car wash. She said he was sober, then corrected herself, getting there. The garage became a border crossing where Hope showed a passport that never quite matched the photo. On the pegboard, tools hung with a neatness that felt almost ceremonial. Hammer, box cutter, duct tape, a roll of plastic drop cloth left over from when Thomas helped his father repaint the dining room. Police will tell you that houses confess before people do. The confession is never in the scream, it's in the supply. What you meant to fix becomes what you use to finish. The drop cloth was cut into careful rectangles. One missing piece was found in the kitchen trash, folded like a napkin. The computer in the office was old enough to make clicking sounds. Its history had been erased, expertly at first glance, clumsily at second. A cached article about expedited probate, a search for how long after death to access bank. A map route to a storage unit across town with a gate code on a sticky note, 91723. Someone tried to wipe the trail and ended up polishing it. It's a strange intimacy, reading what a person looked at when no one was watching. It is also, in its way, an autopsy. The timeline tightens like a noose. At 10:14 p.m., a motion sensor in the hallway registered movement. At 10:16, another in the master bedroom. At 10:19, the kitchen. Then nothing until 2:07 a.m., when the garage door opened just far enough for a person to slide under if he had practiced. The police found fibers on the bottom edge, threads from that navy quilt snagged where a child's bicycle had once left a burr in the metal. The quilt had been washed that morning. It would test positive for trace blood by nightfall. There is a kind of silence that is not absence, but arrangement. The bedspreads were pulled tight. The bedside lamps were off. The TV in the living room paused on a meteorologist's hand, mid-gesture, predicting a storm that never arrived. What arrived instead was method. The coroner's report avoided poetry. Ligature marks, minimal struggle, likely incapacitation. Clean appeared 3 times. The word clean is a shout in a room like this. It tells you the killer rehearsed the scene in his head until time itself became a cloth. Thomas had been borrowing his father's sedan during the day, bringing it back with just enough gas to claim kindness. Gas station cameras caught him alone at 1:41 a.m., buying a single pack of gum and staring at the pump numbers like they could answer. He wore a hoodie that swallowed his face and gloves better suited to winter than the humid night. A clerk remembered his eyes, placid like lake water, before someone vanishes under it. He paid cash. He asked if the station had a restroom. He didn't use it. The safe in the master closet was cheap, the kind insurance companies joke about in training videos. The combination had been changed 3 months earlier. Someone had written the new code on the inside of a cookbook dust jacket, a trick learned from an article about hiding in plain sight. The pages smelled like cinnamon. The code worked. Inside, police found bonds, a meager stack of cash, and a will folded with a crease so sharp it looked surgical. The witness signatures were a notary and a neighbor who was hard of hearing. It is astonishing how quietly a future can be sorted. At dawn, a stray cat curled on the hood of the sedan, warmed by the engine that had been alive not long before. The flicker of the garage bulb softened into daylight. Sirens found the street like migrating birds who always know where to land. The detective who took the lead, Carter, carried 2 coffees, one he would never touch. He walked through the house with the steady gait of a man who believes that nothing is unsolvable because the alternative would break him. He paused at the quilt. "This didn't happen to them," he said. "This happened to time." The neighbors stood behind their fences, practicing empathy in quiet. The D'Angelos, the Hernandezes, the unnamed couple with the tiny dog who barked at everything except this. When the coroner's van closed its door, the bark finally came late, like a cough after a long sermon. Thomas Reed did not show up at the shelter that morning. He did not appear at the soup kitchen, where he sometimes lined up and sometimes left before the food. He evaporated in a manner that suggested he was not water. He was oil, slipping, glistening, refusing to mix with the world that made him. Detective Carter stared at the yellow sticky note with the code 9173. It was found inside the old office desk, tucked between unpaid utility bills and a coupon for canned soup that expired 3 years ago. Most people write codes to remember something. Thomas Reed wrote codes to hide. The number didn't belong to any door in the house, nor any bank lockbox. But a quiet cross-check with local businesses revealed it was a gate code, one used by Briarwood Self-Storage, a squat row of corrugated metal boxes on the edge of town, where weeds grew tall enough to swallow the tires of forgotten cars. At 3:12 p.m., Carter and Officer Lane rolled through the gate. It yawned open like it recognized them. Unit 42B was Thomas's, registered under an alias that used his mother's maiden name and an address to a shuttered motel. The lock was intact, the key sitting in an envelope inside Carter's coat pocket. He paused before opening it, the way you pause before stepping into cold water, because you know there's no undoing the first plunge. Lane shifted uncomfortably, hand resting on his service weapon. The metal door screeched as if it hadn't been touched in years. The smell hit first. Stale paper, gasoline, something faintly metallic, like pennies left out in the rain. Inside were no furniture or old family photos, just arrangements. Stacks of newspapers, all with front pages about lottery winners and obituaries circled in red pen. A duffel bag unzipped to reveal duct tape, disposable gloves, a flashlight with dried mud on the handle, and a folding knife still crusted with something that would later test as blood. Carter's voice dropped when he said, "This isn't storage. This is staging." In the corner, a plastic bin with a snapped lid contained envelopes, bank statements belonging to his parents, photocopies of their will, and 3 different drafts of a handwritten note that read, "I forgive you." The handwriting analysis would later confirm it wasn't his father's. It was Thomas's, rehearsed to mimic it. The forgery wasn't perfect, but it was close enough for grief to be weaponized. The most chilling find was in a cardboard box, labeled Tools. Inside were items that didn't belong in any toolbox. A Polaroid camera, film still in the package, a pair of women's reading glasses, a gold chain with a crucifix bent nearly in half. When asked later, his aunt would swear that chain had belonged to his mother and had gone missing weeks before the murders. It was evidence hidden in plain sight, but arranged with care, as though Thomas wanted to revisit each piece, like chapters in a book only he could read. In the back of the unit sat a battered suitcase. Lane flipped it open to find bundles of cash wrapped in grocery store receipts. The dates spanned years, money siphoned little by little, undetected, like a leak in the plumbing no one notices, until the ceiling caves in. Carter counted under his breath. $12,000, enough to keep a man invisible for months, enough to make you wonder if his homelessness had been theater. A cheap prepaid phone lay in the bottom of the suitcase, battery dead. Forensics would later recover 6 numbers from its call log, 4 disconnected, 1 belonging to a pawn shop in another state, and the last to a voicemail box with no greeting. When played, the only sound was breathing, not frantic, not panicked, just slow, deliberate inhales and a faint hum of a song no one on the team could name. By the time they finished photographing the unit, the sun was dipping low, throwing jagged shadows across the rows of storage doors. Carter locked it back up, sealing the cold air and its inventory behind corrugated metal. Lane asked if they should post surveillance. Carter shook his head. "He won't come back here," he said. "This place has already done what it needed to do." As they drove away, the gate slid shut, swallowing the numbers 9173. The code would rattle in Carter's head for weeks, not because of what it opened, but because of the precision with which Thomas had tucked it away. Codes, Carter thought, aren't just for entry. Sometimes they're for timing. He began to wonder if they had opened that unit too soon or far too late. That night, Carter spread the photos across his kitchen table, coffee going cold beside him. Every object in that unit had a pulse. Not literal, but rhythmic, like each was a heartbeat in a larger patient design. Thomas Reed wasn't improvising. He was orchestrating, and if this was the rehearsal room, the performance was still coming. The rain came down in sheets the night Carter received the footage. It was delivered on an unmarked USB drive, slid under the precinct's front door sometime after midnight. No note, no fingerprints. Just a strip of black tape across the casing with 2 words scrawled in block letters. "Watch me." Carter sat alone in the darkened squad room, the only light coming from the monitor as he loaded the file. Static filled the screen, then sharpened into the grainy image of a pawnshop counter. The footage was time-stamped 3 weeks before the murders. Thomas Reed stood there in a faded hoodie, head down, fingers drumming against the glass case. In front of him was a gold chain, identical to the one found bent in his storage unit. The owner, a wiry man with nicotine-stained teeth, slid the chain back across the counter and shook his head. No deal. Thomas pocketed it, glanced once over his shoulder at the security camera, and walked out without another word. That glance wasn't fear. It was deliberate. A marking of time, a note in the score only he understood. Carter froze the frame and zoomed in. Thomas's eyes were vacant but not dull, more like a man who had already left the room in his mind, rehearsing the next move. The pawn shop's address was out of state, nearly a 6-hour drive from Willow Lane. It explained the prepaid phone number in the storage unit's call log, but it didn't explain the second figure in the reflection of the shop's window. A woman, standing just outside, watching Thomas through the glass. Her face was partially obscured by a scarf, her posture unnervingly still. When Carter called the pawnshop owner, the man claimed not to remember Thomas. "Hundreds of people come through here," he said, but his voice cracked when Carter mentioned the woman in the scarf. He swore she had never been in his store, though the footage proved otherwise. Fear makes memory selective. Back at the precinct, the tech team scrubbed the video for any other clues. In the final seconds before the file cut out, the reflection of a passing bus rolled across the window. Its side carried an advertisement for a funeral home, one located 3 blocks from Thomas's parents' house. Carter's chest tightened. Either this was coincidence, or Thomas had just left breadcrumbs for someone willing to follow. The theory forming in Carter's mind was worse than greed. Thomas wasn't simply erasing his tracks, he was choreographing them. Each piece of evidence didn't just explain the last move, it foreshadowed the next. And if the woman in the scarf was part of this dance, the crime scene on Willow Lane might not have been the end. It might have been the opening act. That night, Carter sat in his car outside the pawn shop, rain drumming on the roof. Across the street, a single street lamp flickered, familiar like the garage light back on Willow Lane. He couldn't shake the feeling that Thomas Reed was somewhere nearby, watching the watcher, smiling in the dark. The first lead on the woman came from an unexpected place, a bus driver. Carter had tracked down the transit schedule from the night of the pawn shop footage, matching the reflection of the passing bus in the video. The driver, a man with a voice like gravel and a habit of spitting into a styrofoam cup between sentences, remembered her, not because of her scarf, but because she never sat down. She stood in the aisle the entire ride, hands gripping the pole so tightly her knuckles looked bloodless. She got off 3 stops before the pawn shop and walked in the same direction as Thomas Reed. Her description was maddeningly vague. Mid-30s, average build, no visible tattoos, and a scarf patterned with faded roses. But the driver remembered something else. She wasn't alone when she boarded. A boy, maybe 12, trailed behind her carrying a paper bag stained dark at the bottom like it had been wet. The boy didn't look at anyone. When the driver asked for his fare, the woman paid without a word. Carter pulled stills from the pawnshop footage, enhancing the reflection until the pixels began to fracture. There she was, slender frame, scarf drawn high over her nose, eyes fixed on Thomas like she was counting his breaths. And behind her, barely visible, the outline of the boy. In one frame, the bag he held sagged heavily and something metallic glinted from within. When Carter ran her through facial recognition, the system spat back nothing. No matches in the state database, no driver's license, no arrest records. As far as the system was concerned, she didn't exist. That's when Carter started digging into unsolved cases in surrounding counties. He found one that sent a chill down his spine, a missing woman from 5 years ago, last seen wearing a scarf with faded roses. Officially, her case was closed. Unofficially, her body had never been found. The deeper Carter went, the more the timelines began to overlap. Thomas Reed had been spotted in the same county 2 days before her disappearance. A motel receipt, cash only, no signature. The desk clerk remembered him because of his companion, a woman in a scarf who never spoke. The clerk swore she was the one who paid. Carter's theory began to solidify into something far darker. Thomas wasn't working alone. The woman wasn't an accomplice in the traditional sense. She moved like someone following choreography she hadn't written, as though Thomas had already mapped every step. And the boy? Carter didn't know yet if he was a victim, a witness, or something far more dangerous. What unnerved Carter most was the growing sense that every clue, every flicker of light, every reflection, every bus schedule wasn't evidence they had found, but evidence they had been meant to find. As if Thomas Reed was leading him somewhere, not away from the crime, but straight toward it. It arrived in an unmarked, padded envelope, the kind used for shipping fragile trinkets or secrets you don't want traced. Inside was a small black dictaphone, worn at the edges, its red record button dulled by use. There was no note, no return address, just the machine and the weight of what it might contain. Carter hesitated before pressing play. The plastic felt warm, though it had been sitting in the evidence locker for only minutes. Her voice came through, fragile but steady. "If someone finds this, it means I couldn't stop it." The words belonged to Margaret Reed, Thomas's mother. The date stamp put the recording at 19 days before the murders. In the background, a clock ticked like a metronome, and the faint hum of the garage refrigerator bled through, grounding her voice in the space where Thomas had been sleeping. She spoke in fragments, like she feared someone was listening. "He's different, colder, doesn't eat with us anymore. He stands in the hallway at night, just stands there, until I wake up and see him. Then he smiles, like it's nothing." A long pause. The creak of floorboards. "I think he's practicing something." Her tone shifted to something more fragile. "Yesterday, I found the quilt I made him, folded inside the washing machine. It smelled like bleach. When I asked, he said he spilled coffee, but there was no coffee." The clock ticked louder now, as if the microphone was leaning toward it. "Your father says I'm imagining things, but he doesn't hear the sounds in the garage at night, or the way the light flickers when he walks under it." Margaret's breathing grew uneven. "I love my son. God help me, I love him. But if he asks for the safe code again, I'll have to tell him no, and I don't think he'll accept that." The recording ended not with a click, but with a sudden burst of static, as if someone had touched the microphone. Carter rewound it twice, listening for anything else. A breath, a whisper, a scrape of a chair. On the third playback he caught it, a faint male voice, low and close to the microphone, saying a single word. "Soon." Carter didn't sleep the night he heard the recording. The word "soon" replayed in his head like a low drumbeat, each repetition tightening a knot in his chest. By morning he was at his desk, coffee untouched, replaying the moment again, not just to hear it, but to feel the silence before it. Silence that suggested the speaker knew exactly when the tape would end. He traced the envelope's postmark to a small town 2 hours away. It wasn't much of a place. 2 diners, a church, and a gas station with a single working pump. The post office clerk remembered the package, said it had been dropped into the mailbox after hours by a man in a heavy jacket, hood pulled tight despite the warm weather, no security cameras, no signature. But the clerk remembered something else, the man's walk, limping like one leg was heavier than the other. Back at the precinct, Carter dug through old arrest logs. There it was. 6 months before the murders, Thomas Reed had been picked up for trespassing, found sleeping in a vacant house scheduled for demolition, a heavy jacket in the middle of July, a limp noted in the arresting officer's report, but that wasn't the part that made Carter's jaw tighten. It was the fact that Thomas had been released less than 24 hours later. No bail, charges dropped. He went to the arresting officer, now retired. The man's eyes darkened when Thomas's name came up. "I told them," he said, voice shaking. "Told them he wasn't right. He just sat there in the cell smiling, not angry, not scared, smiling, like he knew he wouldn't be there long." When Carter asked who ordered the release, the officer's answer came quick: "Captain Ross." The same Captain Ross who had signed off on the final crime scene report for Willow Lane. The implication was poisonous. Someone in the chain of command had let Thomas go, and now that same someone had been in control when the murders were investigated. Whether it was corruption, negligence, or something worse, Carter didn't know. But the smell of it was in the air, thick, acrid, impossible to ignore. That night, Carter received a call from an unlisted number. A male voice spoke, low and steady. "You're not chasing him. You're following him. There's a difference." Before Carter could ask who it was, the line went dead. The next morning, a single photograph was waiting on his desk. It showed the storage unit from the outside, its corrugated door half open, and in the shadowed gap, two figures could be seen: Thomas Reed, and beside him the woman in the scarf. The photograph was fresh, not a years-old relic, but something taken within days. Carter could tell by the angle of the sun in the frame, by the faint reflection of a late-model sedan in the storage unit's metal siding. Whoever had taken it was close enough to hear them breathe. It wasn't evidence, it was bait. The trail led north, away from Willow Lane, along a stretch of road lined with skeletal billboards and rusting guardrails. By dusk, Carter found himself staring at the crumbling shell of a roadside motel. The sign still clung to its name, Hollow Pines Inn, though half the letters had fallen, leaving only a fractured whisper of the words. The parking lot was littered with glass, weeds bursting through the cracks like veins. Room 6's door hung slightly open, swaying with each gust of wind. Inside, the air was heavy with mildew and something sharper: bleach. The carpet was mottled with dark stains that told their own story in patches and splatters. On the nightstand sat a half-empty paper bag, its bottom still damp, the same kind the boy had been carrying on the bus. Inside was a kitchen knife, its handle wrapped in fresh duct tape, and a rosary missing its cross. In the bathroom mirror, faint words had been traced into the steam. "You're late." Carter stepped back, the breath catching in his throat. The message wasn't for anyone who might stumble in. It was for him. They knew he would come. They wanted him to find this. A low creak echoed from the far end of the hallway. Carter drew his weapon and moved toward it, boots crunching on broken tile. The sound led him to the last room, its door locked from the outside. Through the narrow gap beneath it, he saw light, flickering like a projector. When he forced the door open, the smell hit first: gasoline. Inside, a small TV sat on the floor, playing looped footage from an old camcorder. It was Margaret Reed, sitting at her kitchen table, folding the navy quilt. She looked up at the camera and smiled. Then, in a single motion, she reached out and switched it off. The screen went black. Behind the TV, a fresh envelope leaned against the wall. Carter picked it up, his gloves trembling. Inside was a single Polaroid of himself, taken from outside his own apartment window. Carter didn't go home that night, not because he feared being followed. He knew he was being followed. The Polaroid had been taken from the alley across from his building, the angle perfect, the focus sharp enough to catch the faint reflection of his own TV in the window. It wasn't surveillance, it was a signature. Thomas was telling him, "I'm already here." Back at the precinct, Carter spread the photographs, the motel knife, the rosary, the recording from Margaret Reed, the pawn shop footage, everything across the conference table. Only when he looked at them as a sequence did the shape of it begin to emerge. It wasn't a trail of mistakes, it was a script. Thomas was directing him through scenes one by one, forcing him to retrace days before the murders. The motel? That was the place where Thomas had first convinced his mother to give him the safe code, according to the unsigned statement in her recording. The pawn shop? The dry run for moving stolen valuables. The woman in the scarf? A stand-in for someone else, someone Margaret had feared but never named. Each location Carter visited had been chosen to feed him a memory that wasn't his, but Thomas's. At 3:14 a.m., Carter's desk phone rang. No caller ID. He let it play to voicemail. The recording was only 4 seconds long, slow breathing, then a whisper. "You fit better than he did." The "he" lodged in Carter's mind like a splinter. Was Thomas referring to his father, to some other intended victim? The idea chilled him. What if Thomas wasn't planning to kill him, but to make him, to shape him into the same state of mind, the same isolation, the same hunger that had driven him to Willow Lane? By sunrise, Carter noticed something else. Every date Thomas had forced him to revisit matched the anniversaries of unsolved murders in other states. The same months, the same days. All cases with missing evidence, all involving family members. If this was a performance, Carter wasn't the audience. He was the understudy. And the final act hadn't been staged yet. On his desk, beneath the mess of case files, Carter found a single yellow sticky note he hadn't placed there. No handwriting, just numbers. 42B, 9173. Midnight, the storage unit. Again. The air around Briarwood self-storage was unnaturally still when Carter arrived. Midnight wasn't just a time, it was part of the script. The sodium lights over the lot buzzed faintly, casting long, skeletal shadows between the rows of corrugated doors. Unit 42B waited at the far end, its metal face catching the moonlight like a blade. The lock was gone, no signs of forced entry, just missing, as if it had never been there. Carter's hand hovered over the latch before pulling it up. The door groaned upward, revealing a darkness so complete it seemed to absorb the light spilling from the lot. He stepped inside, and the smell hit him. Stale air, dust, and something sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in water. When his flashlight beam cut through the black, his breath caught. The unit wasn't filled with boxes anymore. It was a room, a perfect room. The bedspread, the nightstands, the lamp with the ceramic base shaped like a swan. It was an exact reconstruction of the master bedroom from Willow Lane on the night of the murders, down to the photo frames on the dresser, filled with pictures of Thomas as a child. The bed was made, but the pillows had indentations, as if someone had just been lying there. On the quilt, a navy one stitched into a storm, sat a Polaroid camera, loaded and ready. Beside it, a folded piece of paper. Carter unfolded it with gloved fingers. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. "Now you see it like I did." A sound broke the stillness. the faint whir of the camera's film ejecting. Carter froze. He hadn't touched it. The photo slid out slowly, face down. When he turned it over, his own face stared back at him, lit by the flashlight beam, framed perfectly in the recreated room. Somewhere behind him, deep in the shadows, floorboards creaked. He spun, weapon drawn, but the doorway was empty. The only movement was the slow sway of the storage door in the night breeze, yet the air felt charged, as if Thomas had been inches away, close enough to smell the detergent on Carter's shirt. The unit felt smaller now, the air heavier, as though the walls were closing in. And then he saw it, tucked halfway under the bed, a pair of worn boots, their toes pointed toward him. He crouched, reaching for them, and realized with a jolt that they weren't abandoned. They were being worn. Carter's pulse roared in his ears as he realized the boots weren't empty. A slow movement followed, the shift of weight, the flecks of toes inside worn leather. Then, from beneath the bed, a voice, low and almost casual. "You're early." Thomas slid out like a shadow, uncoiling. His face was thinner than in the old arrest photo, his eyes sharp and bright in the narrow beam of the flashlight. He didn't look startled. He looked satisfied. As if Carter's arrival was not an interruption, but a confirmation. "You've been walking my steps," Thomas said, rising to his feet with the deliberate grace of someone who knows there's no rush. "The pawn shop, the motel, the scarf, my mother's voice. I gave you all of it, and you followed, just like he did." Carter kept his weapon trained, but his finger hesitated on the trigger. Thomas smiled, a thin curve without warmth. "The one before you, he didn't last this long." He stepped closer, hands empty but posture predatory. "Do you know what the inheritance really was? Not the money, not the house. It was the story. And now you've learned every line. You could tell it better than I ever could." The flashlight trembled slightly in Carter's grip. "You killed them." Thomas tilted his head. "No, I ended them. There's a difference. Just like there's a difference between chasing and following. You've been following, Carter. And tonight," he gestured around the reconstructed bedroom, "you finish." From the doorway came the faintest creak. Carter's eyes darted for a second, just enough for Thomas to move. The flashlight was knocked from his hand, spinning across the floor. Darkness swallowed the room, except for a thin blade of moonlight through the open door. In the dim glow, Carter saw a third figure step inside, the woman in the scarf. Behind her, the boy, both silent, both watching. Thomas's voice came again, almost gentle. "Every story needs an ending. I think it's time you wrote ours." The storage door rattled in the wind, then slammed shut. By the time backup arrived, Unit 42B was empty. The reconstructed bedroom was gone, vanished without a trace. No bed, no quilt, no Polaroid camera, just a bare concrete floor and the faint smell of bleach, still sharp enough to sting the eyes. Carter's vehicle was parked outside the gate, keys in the ignition, engine cold. His service weapon lay on the passenger seat, one round missing. The security cameras for Briarwood self-storage recorded nothing. Every feed from midnight to 3 a.m. was wiped clean, replaced with static. The only image left intact was a single still frame from the entrance gate, Carter standing beside Thomas Reed, both looking directly at the lens. The woman in the scarf and the boy stood behind them, their faces hidden in shadow. The timestamp read exactly 12 a.m. Carter's disappearance was never classified as a crime. The official file lists him as missing in action, last seen in the course of an active investigation. But among those who worked the Willow Lane case, there's an unspoken understanding that Carter didn't just vanish. He stepped into the story Thomas Reed had been writing for years, and somewhere out there, the ending is still being rehearsed.